What happens when a late-night king adored by millions lets his ego tear down a guest who dared to step onto his stage? The lights blazed on Stephen's set, the familiar desk gleaming, the audience humming with excitement. Pam Bondi, former prosecutor turned advocate, walked out to polite applause, her smile steady but her eyes cautious. She was there to talk about a charity for veterans, a cause close to her heart. But Stephen had other plans. Behind his grin lurked a scheme to boost his show's ratings with a vicious ambush. He'd dug up old rumors about Pam's legal career, twisted them into a scandal, and was ready to pounce. The crowd had no idea they were about to witness a verbal brawl. Stephen leaned forward, his voice dripping with fake charm. "Pam, let's get real. Your time as a prosecutor wasn't exactly spotless, was it?" The audience murmured, confused. Pam's smile faltered, her hands tightening on the armrests. "What are you getting at, Stephen?" she asked, her tone sharp but controlled. He smirked, relishing the moment. "Oh, come on. Those cozy deals with big donors, cases swept under the rug. Sounds like corruption to me." The accusation landed like a punch. The crowd gasped, some booing, others whispering. Pam's face flushed, not with guilt, but with fury at the lie. "Those are serious claims," she said, her voice low, steady, cutting through the noise. "You'd better have proof." Stephen waved a hand, dismissive, his eyes glinting with malice. "Proof? It's all out there, Pam. People talk. You think you can waltz in here and play saint?" His tone was venomous, each word meant to wound. The audience shifted, uneasy, sensing the interview spiraling into something ugly. Pam straightened, her years in courtrooms steeling her. "I've spent my life fighting for justice," she said, her voice rising. "You don't get to smear me with gossip and call it truth," Stephen scoffed, leaning back, his smugness infuriating. "Justice? That's rich. Tell that to the people you let off easy." He was doubling down, feeding off the crowd's shock, his ratings-hungry mind blind to the line he'd crossed. Pam's eyes narrowed, her calm cracking into controlled rage. "Name one case, Stephen. One. Or are you just throwing mud to see what sticks?" The challenge hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. The audience held its breath, the tension thick enough to choke on. Stephen hesitated, his smirk flickering, but he recovered fast, tossing out vague nonsense about patterns and questions. Pam wasn't having it. "You're dodging," she snapped, pointing a finger. "You accuse me of corruption on live television, and you've got nothing? That's not journalism. That's a cheap stunt." The crowd erupted, some cheering her defiance, others shouting at Stephen. He flushed, caught off guard by her fire, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Cheap? You're the one hiding, Pam," he barked, slamming his desk. The sound echoed, a signal the fight was far from over. Pam leaned forward, her voice like steel. "Hiding? I'm right here, Stephen. Let's see who's really got something to say." The stage felt like a battlefield, the air crackling with hostility. Stephen's plan to humiliate Pam was backfiring, but he was too stubborn to retreat. Pam, though blindsided, was ready to fight, her resolve hardening with every insult. The audience, split between loyalties, hung on every word, unaware the war was just beginning. As Stephen scrambled to regain control, Pam's next move loomed, promising to turn his ambush into his own downfall. The studio air crackled as Pam's demand for Stephen to back up his accusations hung unanswered. His face twitched, the smirk gone, replaced by a scowl. He leaned forward, fingers gripping his desk, desperate to claw back control. "You want specifics, Pam? Fine. Let's talk about your whole career. Shady deals? Backroom favors? You're no hero." His voice was a snarl, each word laced with contempt. The audience buzzed, some jeering, others shouting support for Pam. She sat unflinching, her eyes locked on him, a prosecutor staring down. A flimsy witness. Shady deals? Pam shot back, her voice sharp as a blade. "You're making it up, Stephen. I prosecuted criminals, not played your talk show games. Name a single favor I gave. Go on." Her challenge sliced through his. Bluster, and the crowd roared, sensing his weakness. Stephen's jaw tightened, his mind racing for a comeback. He couldn't name a case. There was nothing real to pin on her. But retreat wasn't in his playbook. "It's not about one case," he spat, waving a hand. "It's a pattern. Everyone knows you bent the rules." Pam's laugh was cold, cutting. "Everyone? Or just you? Inventing stories for clicks?" The audience gasped, some clapping as she leaned closer. "You're not a journalist. You're a performer, and this is your worst act yet." Stephen's face reddened, his ego bruised. He slammed a fist on the desk, startling the crowd. "Don't lecture me about performing. You waltz in here acting pure, but we see through you." His voice rose, shrill as he veered into personal attacks. "What's next, Pam? Selling your charity for votes?" The jab was low, vicious, and the audience groaned, some booing loudly. Pam's eyes flashed with fury, but she kept her cool, her voice steady. "You're pathetic, Stephen. Dragging veterans' charity into your lies? That's who you are?" Then she pivoted, her tone turning razor sharp. "But let's talk about you. Remember that guest you mocked last year? A doctor, raising money for kids? You twisted her words, made her sound like a fraud. All for laughs. Her fundraiser tanked. That's your pattern." The revelation hit like a bomb. The crowd murmured, stunned, as memories of the incident flickered. Stephen froze, his confidence cracking. That's not the same," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Pam pressed harder. "Isn't it? You ruin people for ratings, then hide behind jokes. I'm not your punching bag." The audience erupted, some chanting Pam's name, others heckling Stephen. The divide fueled the chaos, the studio a powder keg. Stephen, cornered, tried to pivot. "This isn't about me," he barked, pointing at her. "You're the one dodging accountability." "Dodging?" Pam snapped, standing now, her presence commanding. "I'm right here, answering your garbage. You're the one squirming." The crowd cheered louder, her defiance electric. Stephen, sweating under the lights, saw his ambush crumbling. Desperate, he glanced at the producer, signaling for a break. "We'll sort this out after the commercial," he said, forcing a grin. Pam wasn't letting him off. "No, Stephen, we finish. This now. You started it, so face me." Her words were a gauntlet, thrown down in front of thousands. The producer hesitated, but the audience's roar drowned out any chance of a pause. Stephen's eyes darted, trapped by his own trap. Pam stood tall, unyielding, her challenge echoing in the charged silence. The fight had shifted. Stephen's smug plan was unraveling, and Pam was turning his stage into her courtroom. As the tension peaked, the battle lines were drawn, with no escape for either side. The studio pulsed with raw energy, Pam's demand to continue pinning Stephen to his chair. His forced grin vanished, replaced by a glare as he scrambled to flip the script. "You're grandstanding, Pam," he sneered, voice thick with scorn. "Turning this into your little courtroom drama. Think you're fooling anyone?" The accusation was a wild swing, meant to paint her as manipulative, but the crowd wasn't buying it. Shouts of, "Let her speak!" clashed with scattered boos, the room a cauldron of noise. Pam stood firm, her gaze unyielding, every inch the prosecutor facing a cornered opponent. "Grandstanding?" she countered, her voice clear, slicing through the chaos. "I'm defending myself against your lies, Stephen. You threw the first punch, now you're whining because I hit back?" The audience roared, her words striking a chord. Stephen's face twisted, his composure fraying. "Hit back? You're dodging the truth," he shouted, jabbing a finger. "All this charity talk is a front, and you know it." His insults were sloppy now, fueled by panic as Pam's defiance unraveled his control. She shook her head, a flicker. of disgust crossing her face. Affront? I've met veterans who lost everything, Stephen. My charity rebuilt their lives. What have you built, besides a career on cheap shots? Her voice carried weight, grounded in truth, and the crowd leaned in, captivated. Stephen scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Spare me the sob stories," he snapped. "You're no saint, just another politician playing the hero." The jab was cruel, dismissive, but Pam didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer to the desk, her presence commanding silence. "Let me tell you about a veteran," she said, her tone steady but charged with emotion. "His name was Tom. Lost his leg in combat, then his home. My charity got him. A place to live, a job. He's got his dignity back. That's real, Stephen, not your twisted gossip." The story hit hard. The audience erupted in applause, some wiping tears, their support swinging firmly to Pam. Even the hecklers quieted, moved by her sincerity. Stephen's smirk faltered, his smugness no match for her authenticity. He tried to recover, voice rising to drown out the cheers. "Nice tale, Pam, but it doesn't erase your past," he barked, desperation creeping in. "You can't just spin a yarn and walk away clean." But his words sounded hollow, grasping at straws. Pam's eyes narrowed, her patience thinning. "My past? I've faced tougher fights than you in real courtrooms. You're out of your depth, throwing tantrums because you've got no facts." The crowd cheered louder, her calm logic exposing his flimsy attacks. Stephen, humiliated, felt the room slipping away. His eyes darted, sweat beading on his brow. In a last-ditch effort, he went low, voice dripping with venom. "Facts. Let's talk about your personal life, then. Pretty convenient how your charity work started when your reputation needed a boost, huh? Trouble at home, Pam?" The personal dig was a gut punch, uncalled for and vicious. The audience gasped, some shouting in outrage, the air thick with shock. Stephen's cruelty had crossed a line, and Pam's face hardened, her fury barely contained. She leaned forward, voice like ice, ready to tear into him as the studio braced for her response. Pam's eyes blazed as Stephen's vicious jab about her personal life echoed in the studio. The crowd's outrage filled the air, but she raised a hand, silencing them with a single gesture. "You want to talk personal, Stephen?" she said, her voice low, lethal, like a blade drawn slow. "Let's talk about you, how you've built a career tearing people down, mocking their pain for laughs." The audience leaned forward, hanging on her words, their anger at Stephen now a palpable force. He squirmed, his hands fidgeting, but Pam wasn't letting him off the hook. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she continued, stepping closer, her presence towering despite her calm. "Dragging my life into this because you've got nothing else. But I know your game. I've seen you do this before." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Like that time you ridiculed a grieving mother on this very stage. She'd lost her son, and you made her a punchline. For what? A few chuckles? You're not a host, Stephen. You're a bully." The revelation struck like lightning. The crowd erupted, boos raining down on Stephen, their trust in him shattered. Stephen's face paled, his mouth opening, then closing, as if words had abandoned him. That's taken out of context," he stammered, but his voice was weak, drowned by the audience's fury. Pam shook her head, unrelenting. "Context? You humiliated a woman in pain, just like you tried to humiliate me tonight. But I'm not her, Stephen. I fight back." Her words were a rallying cry, and the crowd roared, chanting her name, their cheers a tidal wave crashing over Stephen's crumbling defenses. He tried to rally, pointing at her, voice shrill. "You're twisting this. This is about your corruption, not me." But the accusation fell flat, a desperate gasp from a man sinking fast. Pam crossed her arms, her gaze piercing. "Corruption? You still haven't named one case, One fact. You're flailing, Stephen, and everyone sees it. The audience's applause swelled, their support now a wall behind her. She pressed on, voice steady but fierce. You thought you could ambush me, ruin me for ratings. But you picked the wrong target. Stephen's shoulders slumped, his bravado gone. The studio lights seemed to burn hotter, exposing every bead of sweat on his brow. In a last pathetic bid to save face, he forced a weak smile. Look, Pam, maybe I got carried away. Let's just move on, okay? The apology was hollow, a coward's retreat, and the crowd jeered, sensing his defeat. Pam's expression didn't soften. Move on, she said, voice like steel. You don't get to slime my name, mock my work, and then slink away with a fake sorry. You answer for this. Her rejection was absolute, and the audience roared louder, their loyalty hers alone. The stage was hers now, Stephen reduced to a shadow of his former swagger. The energy in the room was electric, every eye on Pam as she stood tall, unbowed, her strength a beacon. Stephen's eyes darted to the producer, pleading for rescue, but there was no escape. Pam had turned his trap into his trial, and the verdict was clear. As the crowd's cheers echoed, she prepared to deliver the final blow, ready to end this fight on her terms. Pam stood unwavering, Stephen's feeble apology still ringing hollow in the charged studio. His slumped posture and darting eyes betrayed a man who'd lost his grip, but Pam wasn't done. She turned from him, facing the audience directly, her voice steady and resonant, carrying the weight of truth. This isn't just about me, she said, her words cutting through the electric hum of the crowd. It's about what we let people like Stephen get away with. He thrives on lies, on tearing down anyone who dares step into his spotlight. But tonight, you see him for what he is. The audience erupted, their cheers a thunderclap, their faith in her unshakable. Stephen shrank further into his chair, his hands clasped tightly, as if holding on to the last scraps of his dignity. Pam's gaze swept the room, connecting with faces in the crowd, ordinary people, many older, who'd trusted Stephen's charm for years. You deserve better, she declared, her tone fierce yet warm. You tune in for truth, for laughter, not for this cruelty dressed up as entertainment. Her words struck deep, and the crowd roared again, some standing, their applause a wave of agreement. Stephen's face burned, his silence deafening. She pressed on, her voice rising with conviction. I've fought for justice my whole life, in courtrooms, for veterans, for people who needed a voice. Stephen? He fights for ratings, stepping on anyone in his way. That's not wit. That's weakness. The accusation landed like a final verdict, and the audience's response was deafening, a chorus of cheers and shouts that drowned out any chance of Stephen's recovery. He opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, but no words came. The stage, once his kingdom, was now Pam's courtroom, and she was delivering the closing argument. I'm not here to play his game, Pam said, her eyes blazing with purpose. I'm here to remind you that integrity matters, that standing up to bullies matters. And tonight, we did that together. The crowd surged to its feet, their ovation shaking the studio walls. Pam's strength, her refusal to bow, had turned Stephen's ambush into a triumph of principle. She gave the audience a nod, a gesture of gratitude, and then turned back to Stephen one last time. You wanted a fight, Stephen. You got one. Next time, pick on someone who won't fight back. Her words were a quiet, final jab, delivered with icy precision. Without another glance, Pam walked off the stage, her head high, the crowd's applause following her like a tidal wave. Stephen sat alone, the lights harsh on his ashen face, his desk a barren island in a sea of rejection. The audience's cheers continued, not for him, but for the woman who'd exposed his tactics and reclaimed her truth. The producer signaled for a commercial, but it was too late. Stephen's reputation lay in ruins, his smug empire toppled by Pam's unyielding courage. As the studio faded to black, the energy lingered, a testament to a battle won not with lies, but with heart. Pam's victory was complete, a beacon for anyone who'd ever faced a bully and refused to break. The audience, still buzzing, knew they'd witnessed something real, something that mattered. And Stephen? He'd face the fallout, his stage forever marked by the night he underestimated Pam Bondi.